Oh, hey, what's up, gentlemen and ladies? You just caught me with my brand new phone that I got, which is actually somewhat decent compared to the piece of crap that I had before, and it's got storage, which means that I can download all of those mobile Final Fantasy games that I missed out on, like Final Fantasy Brave Exvius, which is the one that I'm currently downloading right now. Now, Brave Exvius is basically like this throwback turn-based Final Fantasy game, not unlike what you'd see from like the Super Nintendo or PS1 days, and that just kind of got me wondering, what is going to happen to the future of turn-based Final Fantasy games? So, as I'm sure most of you are aware, Final Fantasy XV came out a year and a half ago at this point, and its release marked many changes to the Final Fantasy series, such as the first open-world Final Fantasy, the first one to constantly receive support from the developers through updates and DLC, and perhaps most importantly, the first mainline Final Fantasy game to have a fully action-based combat system. Of course, fans didn't go 2 days after the announcement that Versus 13 would be changed into a main number title without going, "Wow, that's awesome." Wait, does that mean that Final Fantasy isn't going to be turn-based anymore? Of course, Final Fantasy will always to some degree be turn-based, even after the reveal of Final Fantasy XV. We've gotten Final Fantasy Explorers, World of Final Fantasy, and mobile titles like Record Keeper and the previously mentioned All the Bravest that are turn-based, to name a few. But the thing that everyone has been wondering is what will happen to the main series of Final Fantasy games. Can we expect Final Fantasy XVI and XVII to be action-based like 15, or will they go back to a more traditional system? Well, look, obviously we can't give a definitive answer right now since we don't really know what Square Enix is planning internally, and I'm actually sure that this is as big of a debate to them as it is to us, if not even bigger. What we can do, though, is look at all of the official statements that we've gotten from the developers and employees at Square regarding the possible future of Final Fantasy XVI and where they plan to take the series from there. First of all, if we take a look at the internal teams within Square Enix, you currently have their top 3 teams, Business Divisions 1, 2, and 3, working on 3 different titles. Business Division 1 is known as the turn-based Final Fantasy team, and they worked on titles like Final Fantasy X and 13. They're currently working on the Final Fantasy VII remake. Business Division 2 is known as the Action Final Fantasy team. They worked on Crisis Core Type 0 and Final Fantasy XV, which they're still developing updates and DLC for. And Business Division 3 is the Kingdom Hearts team. They're responsible for Birth by Sleep, Dream Drop Distance, and currently Kingdom Hearts 3. Now, out of all of those teams, Business Division 2 is the one that is likely going to finish their work the soonest in the foreseeable future, since Final Fantasy XV is getting ready to receive its last batch of DLC early next year. Meanwhile, the Kingdom Hearts team is probably going to keep working on that series even after Kingdom Hearts 3, and the FF7 team still has a long ways to go considering that the remake is going to be multi-part. We already know that the head of Business Division 2, FF15 director Hajime Tabata, stepped down to work on a separate team within Square Enix named Luminous Productions, and we know that they're not going to be working on the Final Fantasy series, but rather other AAA titles instead. This leaves the Action Final Fantasy team open for a new game and with a spot for a director to step in. If you ask me, it makes perfect sense for them to give Final Fantasy XVI to this team. However, they could always just give them a sequel to one of their previous games, such as Final Fantasy Type 1, or maybe even a new Parasite Eve a la Third Birthday, which was also directed by Tabata. I guess we'll find out. All of this would lead towards Final Fantasy XVI being action-based, which many people would actually be happy with. Final Fantasy XV brought a lot of new players into the series who may have been turned off with the turn-based systems of old. These people feel that turn-based combat is outdated, and that since each Final Fantasy game is supposed to be an evolution, bigger and better, the entire series has been building up to this. And to be honest, some people within Square Enix think this way as well. A 2016 interview with series producer Shinji Hashimoto revealed that they see each Final Fantasy game as being a leap from the others in terms of graphics, story, sound, and even combat. This is why each recent Final Fantasy game has had its own completely custom-made engine. This is why they've each had a new director, writer, and composer. However, this does not necessarily mean that they are unwilling to return to older systems if the game warrants it. The example that Hashimoto brought up is that of setting. The earlier Final Fantasy games were medieval fantasies, but as the series kept going into the 6th and 7th installments, it got more futuristic and steampunk, only to go back to a fantasy setting in Final Fantasy IX. The same is actually true of the combat. The NES Final Fantasies were fully turn-based, but then slowly started adding more action elements. They introduced the ATB bar, which added an element of timing into the combat, but then they went back with Final Fantasy X, which was fully turn-based again. Then FF12 made battles real-time, even though they were still menu-based, but this is still the closest that the series had ever come to an action RPG. only for them to go back to a turn-based battle system with FF13. Again, it really depends on what the director and team feels works best for the game. To quote Hashimoto, Final Fantasy XVI doesn't necessarily have to be more on the action RPG side as we've seen with Final Fantasy XV. When we start work on a new Final Fantasy, we set the bar to make the ultimate fantasy of that generation with each installment. So if a director feels that a certain battle system would work best in the current generation, that's the main system they'll go with. So going back to a turn-based or ATB system with Final Fantasy XVI doesn't seem to be completely ruled out of the water yet. See, people who aren't fans of turn-based games often say that they were just a limitation of the technology and that they were made that way out of necessity rather than choice. However, action games like Zelda have existed longer than Final Fantasy has, and even Square Enix themselves have been making action RPGs with their series like Mana as far back as the Super Nintendo. Plus, I sincerely doubt that the reason they used turn-based systems on the PlayStation 2 and 3 was because of hardware limitations when those same systems ran Devil May Cry and God of War. However, as much as Square Enix wants the public to think that they'll be willing to change anything on a mainline Final Fantasy game if it fits the title, it's very likely that the reason FF stayed turn-based for so long was because that's what the series had always traditionally been. Despite changes, every numbered Final Fantasy game from 1 to 14 was turn-based in some way, shape, or form. Final Fantasy XV was the exception, and it's worth noting that Final Fantasy XV wasn't even originally supposed to be a mainline game at all. It was originally going to be Final Fantasy Versus 13, a spin-off of the Fabula Nova Crystallis series within FF. For all we know, if it weren't for this game turning into 15, the numbered titles might have stayed turn-based forever. And some people would have actually preferred that. Many old-school FF fans, and specifically the Japanese market, were not very happy with the change of combat in 15. We see Square trying to accommodate these players by streamlining aspects of FF15. Instead of mashing the attack button like you would in a hack and slash, you can just hold it. You can also just hold the defend button to block non-AoE attacks instead of having to time the parries perfectly. And wait mode is essentially a turn-based mode for the game where everything would pause and wait for player input, allowing you to do things like scan enemies and target specific points without having to worry about getting hit. But maybe these players are just antiquated, right? I mean, action is the way of the future, and there's no way that Square Enix could go back after making the jump over to action RPGs with 15. Series like Dragon Quest that are still turn-based are very popular in Japan, but barely sell anything over here in the West, and with the Japanese console market dying, are these really the people that we should be listening to when we have a much larger action-loving market outside of Japan ready to eat up Final Fantasy XVI if it plays like 15? Well, to that argument, I have one thing to say.
You'll never see it come back.
Love it or hate it, you can't deny Persona 5's critical success, especially to a Western audience. This game defies every single rule of modern games, and it absolutely crushes while doing it. With Final Fantasy XV, everything needs to look extremely realistic because Westerners like dark, gritty graphics. Persona said, nah, we're gonna go with an anime art style. Final Fantasy XV needed to have every single line of dialogue voice acted. This is 2017, people won't stand for reading text boxes. Persona said, now we're gonna make you read hours worth of text boxes and you're gonna love it. Final Fantasy XV had a huge open world because every game needs to be open world now, right? Persona 5 said, now we're gonna do old school linear and the story is gonna be amazing. Final Fantasy XV had a high action-packed combat system with explosions and weapons flying everywhere because we gotta make the game feel cool. Persona said, now we're gonna do turn-based combat and it's gonna be some of the best the genre has to offer. Pitch that idea to any developer in 2014 and they would have told you that the game is doomed to fail outside of Japan. And yet here we are today. A series that was once considered pretty niche and that hadn't had a mainline release in around 10 years since back in the PS2 is now selling 2 million copies worldwide and was nominated for Game of the Year up there with Horizon Zero Dawn, Super Mario Odyssey, and The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. This game single-handedly opened the eyes of, I believe, many Japanese developers. You don't have to have big-budget, state-of-the-art 3D graphics and cinematics. You don't have to have jam-packed, action-based combat to be successful in the West. As long as every aspect of the game is fine-tuned, the battle system, the soundtrack, the world, the characters, the story. You guys remember when Final Fantasy's thing that it was known for was its story? Whatever happened to those days? However, there is one argument that I can see people making regarding Persona 5 comparisons. While the game may have been critically acclaimed and well received in the West, the numbers don't lie. Persona 5 may have sold 2 million copies worldwide, but at launch, Final Fantasy XV sold 5 million copies, and as of February 2018, they've sold 7 million. Keep in mind that this was before the PC release of the game, which director Tabata hopes will sell an extra 2 million copies, a number that might seem reachable considering Steam sales and the fact that Final Fantasy XV's second season pass still has yet to come out. This would bring the total up to 9 million, a number that is much more comparable to that of the entire Persona series combined at 8.9 million. So maybe those fancy graphics and action combat systems do pay off after all. But anyways, regardless of what you guys think, I think that we can all at the very least agree that we're really excited to see what Square Enix has in store for Final Fantasy XVI, or Final Fantasy XVI as I like to call it. Anyways, I think that Brave Exvius should be done downloading on my phone now, so I'm gonna go ahead and check that out. You guys have fun. Wait a second. Oh my god. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I really hope that you enjoyed it. Like always, shout out to Plan and Walk for pledging on Patreon. If you guys would like to pledge, really helps me out. Links are in the description, yada yada yada. And yeah, I guess either way, that's all that I have for you guys today. I hope that you guys enjoyed. If you did, be sure to blitz that like button, subscribe as always. Stay tuned, Kupo.